Hey, I'm Tim Wagner, and welcome to another Writing in the Dark video. Today, I want to talk about, does horror have to be scary? Um, so, what makes horror horror in the first place? Because the answer is no. Horror does not have to be scary in order to be horror. So, a horror story is a story that's centered on the emotion of fear, but it doesn't mean that it has to provoke fear in the reader necessarily, or the viewer if you're thinking about film. Um, it's also a nightmarish distortion of reality. This is how I define horror. That can be psychological. It doesn't have to be like magical, supernatural. Um, it can be very real world as long as the situation feels like a nightmarish distortion of reality. It needs to be a story that produces a pleasurable frisson in the reader, or I'm not maybe not pronouncing that right, but it's like a delicious kind of scare, or sort of like a shudder down your back. It's not necessarily you're absolutely terrified. Um, it's also a safe way for both readers and writers to confront the darker aspects of existence through fantasy, symbolism, and metaphor. So you may read a horror story and you may be able to emotionally process or intellectually process or confront anyway something really dark about life, like death, like why are people cruel to each other. And it doesn't have to be scary for you to go ahead and have that sort of intellectual interaction, I guess, or emotional interaction with a horror story. So can horror stories actually scare anybody? Depends on what you mean by actually scare. The kids in the hall have a really cool sketch they did a long time ago called Boo, where they are making fun of, or at least addressing the issue of, are people literally terrified by the stuff they read in a horror story? And I'll put a link to it below the video when I'm all done getting this thing loaded up. You can go check it out. But it's a parody on the idea that anybody could literally be scared. Readers always know, or viewers always know, that they're reading a story or watching a film. Now, our brains aren't designed to tell the difference between reality and fantasy, because in the real world, everything's real. A bunny that's like hopping on a field, if a shadow goes overhead, it can't afford to look up and decide whether it's a hawk coming down at it. It runs like hell. Even if it was just like a plane far away or a cloud or whatever, it can't afford to be wrong. So our brains are still like that. So there's an awful lot of mental gymnastics we do to try to deal with the fact that there are things that are real and things that are not real. But in general, while some people do react, your body may react as if it's real. Your heart may, rate may go up, your respiration may speed up, whatever. You might start sweating a little bit, feel jolts of adrenaline. You're more likely probably to do that in a movie than you are in a book, but you still can do it in a book. But you still always know. You can always close the book. You can always turn the TV off. You can always get up in the theater and walk out. There is never a time when you literally believe that what you are experiencing is a story. I mean, not a story, is reality. So that means anything you feel is probably not true fear. And the fact that there is this kind of distance is what makes horror safe to read. It may not feel like it, because it could be unsafe in lots of other ways, because it could be dealing with things that are very, very dark. It could be, no character may be safe, whatever. But it is safe in the sense that that distance is always there. I think it's another reason why a lot of horror stories do have a supernatural element. It's an extra distancing kind of thing. Stories about people just being horrible to each other, that happens in real life. No distance. Vampires, running around killing people in Salem's Lot, no vampires. So there's that extra level of distance for the reader to make it just a little bit safer. Horror is about the fear of the unknown. That's the only kind of fear there is. I mean, once, I've argued before, maybe in a previous video, that if a trope in horror becomes too well known, like vampires, if you know all of their rules and how to combat them, they're known. They're still a threat, but they're a threat the same way like a lion might be if you were in Africa. And so you know how lions work. You know how, when they're most active during the day, and when it's hot they sleep, or whatever. You know the rules. So yeah, they're still terrifying and they can still kill you, but you have a measure of control there on what you do. You have a way to combat them. They are known. And if something like that happens to a trope like a vampire or a werewolf, the trope loses its power to at least be, really effective in horror. Still work really well like an adventure story or something like that. So what happens a lot of times with horror is that readers and viewers, when they're new to horror, usually when you're young, and you may be watching things like Scooby-Doo or whatever, safer cartoons, you encounter things for the first time and they have a huge impact on you. You encounter the same kind of things, the same kind of tropes over and over and over. As you get older, they become very well known and they don't have that kind of impact on you. I think a lot of times when people say, oh, that film wasn't scary, that this is what's happening. You've become a more experienced consumer of horror, and it's not unknown to you. These story types, these tropes, these images. You watch a slasher movie for fun because you've seen a billion of them. I remember when I saw Halloween for the first time when it first came out, and up to that point, it may seem almost unimaginable to younger people, but there weren't movies like that out that you could see easily. They were just starting to come out into theaters, and I was terrified of this movie until the person I was with was my sister's boyfriend at the time. He was enjoying the movie and the audience reaction so much that helped me a lot. It made me realize that there was a lot more going on here than just look at these scary images, look at the suspense. Jaws terrified me the first time I saw it a few years earlier when I was in 5th grade. Had never seen a movie with that kind of suspense in it before. Now, I've seen a billion of them. They do not affect me the same way. It would be nice if you could get back to that, but that's the way it is with childhood. It would be nice if we could experience those things, feel things as intensely. So I think that's part of why a lot of people worry or at least have the opinion that horror isn't scary. It's not affecting them, so they think something is wrong with the horror as opposed to something is just different about them. So what else can horror do besides scare readers? Well, horror is extremely versatile. You can use it in all kinds of ways. It can invoke subtler responses like dread, unease, disquiet, a sense of unreality. And that may be it. And they still count as horror stories. It can be enjoyable. You can just enjoy it for entertainment, like I started to learn to do when I saw Halloween. Enjoy the tropes for what they are, enjoy the effect it has on other people, enjoying seeing, something as an audience, and having so much fun with the whole experience, not just your own. But it's just enjoyable. It's not frightening at that point. And it can be humorous. You can find parodies of horror. You can find sometimes, for kids, they'll use tropes for horror, like in the Hotel Transylvania movies. They're not scary, but they're using horror tropes in order to tell a fun story. And in that sense, it's used to entertain young people in a very mild and restrained way. Very young person might be scared of Hotel Transylvania because they're monsters, but probably not very scared. Horror tropes can be used in other types of fiction: fantasy, science fiction, adventure, thriller, romance, literary fiction. These stories may not be scary. They may be romantic with a little bit of scariness in it, maybe, or at least the tropes of horror in it. Same for fantasy. You might have a vampire that your heroes are fighting, and yeah, it's a little scary, but that's not the prime point of it. The main point of it. Adventure is the main point of it, probably. Horror can be social commentary, so it can be a lot deeper than just a boo type story. Nothing wrong with boo type stories, they're great. But it can be something like Get Out or Us, something that digs deeper into what's going on. It uses horror as a lens to look at things in a deeper way, and you can enjoy it on the surface for what it is, it seems to be, but you can also, with reflection, maybe start to enjoy the depth of it as well. And those stories may not be scary, because their goal is not to scare you. Their goal is to get you to think, eventually. And horror can be a comment on the genre itself, where you have movies that make fun of other movies. or make fun of horror, or at least point up different things about horror. The Scream movies were like that. They were very self-aware that they were movies about movies, and even, well, the characters were very genre savvy in the way they dealt with everything in there. So what should you do as a horror writer? Write whatever kind of damn story you want, whatever type appeals to you at any given time. You may want to try a scary one time and then try a fun one another time. Doesn't matter. You may find kind of a niche that works really well for you, either one that you enjoy or maybe one that you respond well to, just as a creator, and you just seem to do very well at it, so you focus your attention on that. But don't worry. If somebody tells you it's not scary, who cares? What they're telling you is it's not scary for them. And there's a million ways to be scary, an infinite amount of ways to be scary. Different people find different things scary. The whole idea of the word scary, like it's one encompassing thing that all of horror is affected by or it can relate to, is ridiculous. But if you want to try to write a scary story, here's some tips on how you can do it if you're really aiming for your fiction to be scary. So you want to avoid using well-known tropes like vampires, werewolves, ghosts, or find a different way to approach them, put a new spin on them, because they're too well known. You want to draw on your own experiences and observations and your own imagination for horror. And I don't mean write about traumatic experiences you've had unless you want to. You do not have to re-traumatize yourself just to write a story. But your specific experiences can't be known to anyone until you share them. So if you had a particular kind of experience that was frightening, that may have seemed like maybe you saw a ghost, or kind of feel sort of like a ghost, even if you didn't know it wasn't, it was kind of your imagination, but the experience you had, the feelings you had, are yours. They're nobody else's, and until you share them, people can't know them. And so what you want to use is your experience of fear, to fuel your stories, the emotion that fuels your stories. So you want to feel what that was like for you, or think what that was like for you, and use it in your fiction. So don't write about spiders because you're afraid of them. What you want to do is communicate on your experience of fearing spiders. So the spiders part aren't scary. It could be any damn thing. You could switch spiders for rats or birds or snakes. But the experience of your fear is what will generate that in the reader. Sensory detail can help create that atmosphere. Focusing on the character's emotional experience of the story is vital, because it allows readers to connect to your character, relate to them, and if they care about what happens to them, they'll worry about them, they might be scared for them. Horror should be intimate, and those are some of the ways to do that. You can also use suspense techniques. I don't know if I've done a video on suspense techniques yet. I might go ahead and do one for you later. So you can just look up how to do suspense. But the suspense is basically the accumulation of detail that works toward but delays the ultimate payoff. So, it's not like the serial killer, jumps out and tries to kill you within the first 3 seconds necessarily. There's a slower buildup of detail before the killer shows up. It builds tension, and that can go ahead and create that atmosphere of fear. So I was looking around on the internet for a good quote to kind of finish this up, and I found one from Angelica Jade Bastian. She said, "Horror should provoke a deeper response that forces you to consider and understand how fear shapes our lives in ways personal and cultural, intimate, and inescapable." And I think it's a really good way to define horror overall, the broad scope of it, other than just saying, horror is scary. So I hope you liked the video. Hope you got something out of it. I'm going to go ahead and put a link for the Kids in the Hall video at the bottom of this. And I'll see you next time with another video.